Hi everyone, it's Jerry. Let's have a look at a game from round 3 of the 2022 Tata Steel Masters tournament on the white end Daniil Dubov, and he's paired against Vidit Gujrathi. There are a few takeaways for me from this game, this Italian game. A late opening idea I found interesting, some middle game ideas. We also get to see a king get some exercise. Vidit's king not only goes uncastled, but goes for a walk in this one. These are always entertaining games to go through. So the first moment to speak of, I guess, is this move 6 by black, h6, questioning the bishop when exactly, when the king is uncastled. Bishop, of course, maintains the pin. And we do this because if at some point we want to break the pin with g5, this committal g5 move, it's less likely the knight sacrifice on g5 will be working for white, because the king still maintains the option to find shelter on the queen side. From here, a5, an ambitious decision with the a pawn. The computer will also point out a6. Both of these moves have something in common. They are vacating a7 for the bishop in anticipation of d4. That's a nice fallback square. c3 is prep work for d4, so we can expect this move at some stage. Additionally, a5 is not allowing white to grab queenside space so easily. With b4, there's a grip over that point. Why wouldn't everybody play a5? It's because this is now a bit more weakened. Maybe bishop b5, or even the queen knight one day getting into b5 can be a problem for white, or a problem for black. After this move, knight a3, the move played in the game, this was one of the thoughts that ran through my mind. I'm like, oh, all right. See this, black wants to be more ambitious. Maybe I'll try to be a pest one day with my knight on b5. It's not the only idea white has in mind with the knight on a3, getting into b5, but we also have this typical e3 square in mind. Knight a3, it's just an atypical way to get into e3. Most more common is by way of d2, f1, and e3, both requiring 3 tempi. Forget all of that. When I started the video saying that there is a late opening idea that I found interesting, this is that moment. Vidit's decision now on move 8, bishop takes knight, so an imbalance early on in this, out of this Italian game. If you're going to give up the bishop for knight, you better justify it in some way. What is black saying? I've compromised your queenside structure. Now, I'd like to throw white's queenside structure under the microscope for a minute. I don't want to just stop there and say it's a compromised queenside structure. I'd like to point out that because of this exchange, a3, a4, and c3 are now holes. But I'm not really seeing those 3 squares as squares, let's say, a black knight could get to and be a pest to white. I'm more so drawn to white's d pawn. Since white doesn't have a b pawn around, the d3 pawn is the one that's is the only pawn now around that can control c5. Now, the c5 square is a very important square to keep control over because, well, once this pawn gets to d4, it probably needs to stay there. If ever there's a capture or a push, c5 would then become a hole, and a black knight getting into that square would not just be a best piece for black, but probably a best piece in the position. It's that strong of a piece. So I could say, what's the justification for giving up the bishop for a knight? I could say white has a compromised queenside structure, or maybe the more detailed view is there's now a greater restriction placed on white's d3 pawn. It probably needs to go to d4 and stick around there for some time. One final note. What bishop was just exchanged for the knight? Black's bad bishop. If in one of your own games you're using your good bishop to take out a knight, you probably need an additional reason to support that decision. Okay, from here, queen e7, castles, proceed with caution, knight b8. Black is already underdeveloped in this position and is taking another step backwards. For what reason? Well, he wants to connect knights. This is a maneuver you will often see out of the Ruy Lopez. The Breyer variation has this maneuver. In that Breyer variation, you're also looking to have the c-pawn contribute. I'm not so sure that's the case in this environment with this imbalance present. It's more so to have the knights one day connected. So this is nearby. As I started out in the beginning of the video, I said that Black went uncastled. If Black wants to castle in this game, he can safely. I'd like to highlight this variation instead of the underdeveloping plan. Computer points out G5, B6, and fianchetto. Has the correct structure and bishop are coordinated well. And nearby queenside castles. How can white maybe interfere with this setup? Let's say bishop b5. This isn't quite working out for white because after queenside castles, an idea to swipe the knight and then win out on e5 would not be working because after the pawn recaptures, there's a timely attack against the queen. And Black is able to defend here in time. Soon, this structure will kill these two minors. I'm also going down this line here because we get to see this knight on c5 will soon be a best piece. Okay, anyhow, you could go forward with breaking the pin and a quick queenside castles. Okay, from here, knight b8, d4, sure enough, knights are connected. Rook b1, half open file, and pop quiz. Black to move here, I'll give you a multiple choice question. What move would you play here? We have this pin. How do we get out of it? Your choices are g5 or knight f8 with next up knight g6 attacking the bishop. Which move would you play? This one or this one? Feel free to pause the video. Okay. In the game, it is g5. There's a big problem with knight f8. This was one of the instructional moments for me from this game. I am more positionally minded. Yeah, I'm more positionally minded, and I'm not normally so quick to make these committal decisions with with g5, excuse me, creating these holes on f5 and h5. There's a problem with this positional approach. Knight f8, g6, and then castles kingside. What is the issue? This is the issue. Knight takes e5. This is a really strong variation for white. After pawn takes knight, white can follow up with f4 and e5 is collapsing. There's still this pin. Big problems for black. What do? Either capture on f4 or d4 is met with e5, and you're getting the piece back while also opening up the position. So that's a problem. If, let's say, g5, e takes f6, if there's this check, you're not getting the bishop because the bishop can block on f2. What other variation to maybe test out here? Let's say in this position, instead of either capture, you play knight g6. There's bishop takes knight. Queen takes bishop, f takes towards the center. Queen is hit, f7 is collapsing. Big problem there for black. If you take with the pawn, you still take here, and there's going to be a problem on the f-file squares one way or another. take with the pawn, bishop takes f7. If you take with the knight, this is considered best. Then queen takes e5. This is an excellent position for white. Okay. One final variation, I guess, would be g5. And after these chops and this one, the pin is maintained. How are we getting out of this? It's not easy. Okay. Important to see this tactical shot on e5 in short. This maneuver, given enough time, maybe something to consider, but it's not quite working out here. In the game, g5, bishop g3, knight takes e4, queen c2. What do we do about this pressure against the knight? f5 or knight takes bishop? Why not? I'll throw another pop quiz your way. Which of these two would you play? Feel free to pause the video. Okay, here we go. Move played in the game, f5. Computer notes that you could go ahead and take the bishop straight away, but I could see why, a human player would not want to take the bishop so fast. If knight takes bishop in this position, white will, violate the principle that says take towards the center with the pawns. He's going to take away in this case, and now there's an accident that's likely going to happen on f7. So for example, let's say knight here, opening up the bishop, could take on f7. This is not winning for white, but it's certainly scary, these moves here. That's like an only move for black. It says after queen e2, this position is equal. Okay, anyhow, not so fast to open up this file for the rook. Note the timing of this capture in this game. First, it's f5. Pawn takes pawn. Black recaptures with the pawn. If you take with the knight first, the bishop gets to take. This knight doesn't have a way out in taking the bishop one day. Also, rook b5 as a follow-up is problematic. What are we doing about this e5 pawn? How do we stop this? c5? Now there's rook e1, there's probably a sacrifice nearby, maybe even some undermining move like g4, trying to win the knight outright. All of the white pieces are functioning, and we still have these guys on the back rank. So it's important not to take with the knight in this position in the game with the pawn. So now if rook b5, we can play here. Rook takes pawn, we have that covered. So after pawn takes and rook e1 only at this point, does the knight go ahead and take the bishop? There is not going to be the coordinated pressure on f7 in this case. White takes towards the center. e4 follows. This pawn is in a pin. This is not a threat just yet. g4, a doubled pawn, often an expendable pawn. g4 looking to break down this structure. Knight c5, knight d4, and rook to f8. Some support necessary over f5. From here, pawn takes, bishop takes, and can you spot Dubov's next move? Feel free to pause the video. Okay, considered a best move played in the game, rook takes b7. Sharp play. Typical of Dubov. What is the idea behind this move here? The knights do go backwards. That rook can be captured, but it shouldn't be captured. The move played in the game is rook f6. What's the issue with knight takes rook? The issue would be bishop b5 check. Now what does this king do? If you move with the king to d8, that's going to hurt. A fork and the queen is lost. If you block with the bishop, a skewer, queen is once again going to be lost. And your only other option is pretty much to run to f7. But then the bishop would fall, and this knight is hardly worth only 3 points. Probably at least worth a rook, especially with queen still aboard, and the king super vulnerable. So, poison rook. The best move was the move played in the game. Nice defense here by Vidit with rook f6. This controls c6. No knight jump there. And also vacates f8 for the king. So new squares produced. Maybe g7 is one of the more secure squares for the black king. From here, queen b1. Defense of the rook while still maintaining pressure on e4. Maybe even there's a queen pivot on b5 for a check. Only at this stage, only after f8 is vacant, do we have knight takes rook. Queen takes knight. Rook d8. Knight takes bishop. Rook takes knight. Rook takes pawn. What are we doing about this skewer? What move would you play here? Feel free to pause the video. A lot of pop quizzes thrown your way. It's 3 too many. Okay, here we go. Rook d1. Very important detail. If you immediately block, you will lose. Let's see why. Let's see why it's important to have this move inserted first. If you immediately block on this move 25, you lose in the following way. Queen c6. And now what would black's options be? We can forget about the queen trying to block in these ensuing lines. She already has one responsibility for as long as this tension between the rooks remain. If you give her a second responsibility, you're asking for trouble. You're going to lose a piece one way or the other. So let's consider first the king move. What's wrong with king f8? That's met with this check, another check, and there goes the rook. Next move. Let's consider the rook block. We have another check. If king f8, that's mate. Got that one covered. And if we go in this direction, well, now after this check, the black queen is forced to block. And we can take the rook straight away. Queen takes, bishop takes, we're up the piece. So why is it important to first insert the check and only then play rook e5? d8 is vacant. After queen c6, the move played in the game, the king can and should go to d8. Queen on a8 check, king d7 only move, bishop check, here's the walk. King e6, this is an even position. Another check, king f6, another check, king f5. Both players are pretty much in blitz mode. They're under 10 minutes each. From here, f3, this is the losing move for white. Considered best for white here is returning with the queen to c8. This move can be played without fear of king takes rook, because an aesthetic finish would follow. In the following way, mate in 3, check, only move, check, only move, mate. That would be a cool sequence. Black has plenty of time to work out that detail. I wouldn't expect black to take the rook if queen c8 was played. In the game, we had f3, rook takes rook, pawn takes rook, king recaptures, another check, king marches forward still, bishop c6, black queen improves, g3, the only other option was king h3, but that would allow rook h1, and now there are 3 different mates, rook mate, queen mate. I'd probably go with the pawn mate. Okay, in the game, g3, g4, no piece moves. A new square is opened up for the queen. Mate in 2 threat in the corner. From here, queen a7, king d2, the walk is over. White resigns. There's no good follow-up here. These two ideas are still present. How do you stop them? You know, you could go here with the queen, but a queen exchange is the same as resigning. You know, this is completely dead for Team White. So, an interesting game in this one. No good follow-up for White. Some cool, you know, that late opening idea to give up the bishop for knight, and yeah, keep in mind that little maneuver of knight f8 to g6, that sacrifice on e5. That was probably the main takeaway for me in this game. That's something I could very easily see myself falling for. So anyhow, feel free as usual to leave any feedback to this video in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe took a thing or two away. That's all for now. Take care.